This week's PoddyC, we are joined by Megasett, rank one title holding MISTWEAVER 7 seasons in a row. PoddyC guest, top 5 PoddyC most favorite hosts, challenger. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
The rest of the show. All right, it's episode 48 of the PoddyC. Joining us this week is the user-voted 5th most popular host of the PoddyC. It's Megasett.
Wait,
welcome.
What?
That's right. We had a little survey, and Franck came in 4th, I think, and Megasett came in 5th, and then I think it was Growl in 6th when we had who's your favorite member of the PoddyC. Remember when we did the game show thing a couple episodes
ago?
back?
Yeah. So she was 5th ahead of
That's right.
Ahead of Growl even?
Or maybe ahead of Franck or Growl. I don't know. Franck knows the answer. She was 5th is the point.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. And
I confirmed ahead of Growl.
And she was on like one time, I think. So
yeah,
once
or twice.
That's crazy motion. All right, cool. So yeah, glad to have her on today. We plan on talking a lot about Mythic Plus today. We're gonna get to the bottom of this shit. Where have they gone? Maybe not wrong is the way to put it, but like they made a bunch of changes. Are they going in the right direction? What'd you say? You love Mythic Plus, Dorky?
I love M+.
Yeah, I love that you love Mythic Plus.
Hell yeah.
I actually randomly had a Mythic Plus video get like almost 100,000 views, and I didn't even know it got posted.
I'm telling you,
right
people love
this.
M+.
Yeah, people love it. People love M+, and they love talking about Mythic Plus. Mythic Plus is like, it's like a permanent drama. There's so much to talk about for like 8 years now. Like at any point you could just bring like, oh, I really like this or don't like this, and people are just like, no, you're wrong or you're right, whatever. Like people care a lot about it, which is certainly a good problem to have.
Yeah, it's a lot of it changed as well coming into this X pack. I also had a video recently, like with I kind of like tier listed all the changes, and at the end of it, I kind of realized like I only put one thing above the middle tier. And then almost every other thing that they changed this expansion was bad. But the one thing that I put in the top was the new affixes, like the level 2 affixes. I'm a big fan of those. I think they're so good.
Yeah, I want to say before we even begin that despite all the complaints we've had with M+, and how much I talk about people complaining about M+, and people calling it bad, I think M+ is actually really fun right now. I've actually been having a blast. I'm pretty addicted to M+ right now. But maybe it's just because I haven't pushed keys in a long time. Because, like, when I think back to Dragonflight, I didn't really push keys for most of it. Like, season 2, I was busy doing TGP, which I wouldn't consider pushing keys. Season 3, I was busy with MDI, and then I was busy with TGP again in season 4. And it feels really refreshing to just be able to do live keys. Because this is the first time I've really been doing a lot of live keys since last expansion, like the beginning of last expansion.
Wait, I want to ask you a question. You said I did TGP one season, and that's not really pushing keys, and I want to ask you what the difference to you in your head is, or maybe how it's played in doing live keys versus doing TGP. Is it like the depletion and you're constantly changing what dungeon you're in? You're not like pulling one for 8 hours a day. Like, what is that like?
Yeah, it's so different. It's exactly that. When I'm doing TGP, it's more like raid progression. I would say TGP and MDI is much closer to doing raid than it is to doing M+, which sounds weird because like you're literally in M+. But the way you're progressing these dungeons, you're like literally doing the exact same pull over and over and over again. You're like sitting in front of a boss and just like wiping to that boss over and over again until you like figured out the exact strategy, cooldown timings, and you're just trying to map everything out. You're trying to have like weak wars for all the different parts of the dungeons. And when I'm doing live keys, it's a lot more organic, maybe, or natural, whatever you want to put it. It's all natty. You're literally just going in there, you're just slamming keys with the boys, and whatever happens, right? Like, you're kind of doing things on the fly. You're, like, thinking about your CD timings, you're thinking about the routing, and when stuff happens, you can't just restart. When stuff happens, you just have to adjust to the mistakes or problems. Like, sometimes you'll ninja pull a pack, and it's like, oh, well, we can still do this. It's fine. Like, this pack might have cost us like a minute, but it gives us 20 count. So how do we make up for that 20 count? Well, what are we replacing this 20 count with? And you're just like thinking about stuff on the fly, and it's a very different dynamic. And I don't think people will understand this until they're actually doing MDI or TGP themselves.
Well, it sounds like a lot of improvising, right? Like you're like things are not always the same. In a raid boss, if something goes wrong, if you're on Silken Court and half the group dies, you just wipe it, right? You don't figure out, oh, how do we go with 5 people dead? It's like, okay, we're just gonna wipe. If it, in a MDI TGP thing, oh, we're gonna try this pull. Oh, we like failed. We might as well start again, right? Rather than like do a practice run with it going wrong. And that's like more organic. Megasett, do you get a lot of the same feelings from like doing live keys in Mythic Plus? Do they give you something else that WoW or other games don't give you?
I have raided in Final Fantasy, and it's very different than WoW raiding. And I have a hard time kind of like getting away from the idea that I want something like Mythic Plus. So I feel like it's very unique, but a spammable form of content isn't unique to WoW. But at the same time, there isn't really anything else out there like it yet. There was that one game that we had the alpha for. I can't remember its name. Or it's Mythic Plus without everything else, right?
Oh, it's a good.
Fellowship.
I can't remember
What was that game?
Fellowship, yeah.
Oh yeah, dude, I couldn't play it. I wanted to play that game.
You couldn't. So yeah,
Wait,
I did
you
want to
play it,
ask
Meg?
Dorky if
You said
no, I didn't.
Oh, okay.
I never downloaded it.
It
I wanted
had
to
the
ask
worst-
if
Oh, go ahead.
it's kind of back to what we were talking about. You can go ahead with Fellowship.
Well, I was just gonna say the beta was at the worst time ever, or the alpha.
Mm-hmm.
It was like only for a week, and it was only like business hours. It was like 9 to 5, and then
yeah.
it just went down. So like, if you did anything at all, you just couldn't even play it. It was just a bad timing thing. But yeah, go with where you were gonna go.
I wanted to ask if like TGP or MDI or any of the super scripted forms of Mythic Plus feel more similar to live keys now that we don't have the different weekly affixes. Like it's 12s are pretty much the same every week. So does that change how you view live keys versus like the TGP keys, or is it still just less scripted overall?
I sort of see what you're getting at, because it is kind of true. Having no affixes in the plus 12 and higher changes that dynamic a lot, but I can't really say for sure until I've done TGP and MDI with no affixes. Because one of the big differences is when you're doing TGP and MDI, you're having to think about all the different possibilities of affixes, and you're like trying to prepare as much as possible. There's like so much, well, more specifically TGP, because MDI, you're given the maps a week in advance. But with TGP, there's definitely a lot more thinking about, okay, well, what do we do about this if we're getting Sanguine? Or what do we do about this if it's 4 to 5 instead of Tyrannical? And yeah, it's different for live keys too. For live keys, we're definitely thinking about the dungeon more so than how do we do this dungeon around these affixes. For me, it's been refreshing, but I've enjoyed it.
Okay, so I think Dratnos kind of started us on the right spot going into this, and you were saying like, okay, I did these tier list of these things, and there was one thing that I thought was just an absolute slam dunk, and that may have been a good like just talking point to begin with. So let's just, maybe if we're talking about Mythic Plus in the current expansion, we can talk about each individual thing, what we like about it, what we don't, maybe where they go from here, and was a success. So like, let's just, this maybe is not even relevant to high keys, right? It doesn't exist, and maybe that's part of the conversation. But the affixes. So the affixes for everyone going up and getting portals, and people doing their weekly keys, people who are farming crests, any of those things. You interact with this and every time. Do you guys think that the current Kiss Curse affixes, maybe not even in the exact ones that are out, so even more the concept, like is the concept of what they're doing the right way to go for the future of Mythic Plus?
I think yes. I think banger. I think the changes they've made to them have been really good as well across, like, if you compare the versions we had on week 1, all of them have gotten like duration and potency benefits. Like they've buffed how powerful it is. Voidborn on week 1 was it was like half as much cooldown reduction and no versatility, and it was like 20 seconds instead of 30. So they amped up the power that you get from actually doing the thing a lot, and I think that was really important and really good. Yeah, I think they're in a really good place now. Like I personally am still undecided about whether I would like them in the keys above 12. I haven't pushed any keys this season, so I don't want to have too much of an opinion without having pushed this season, because there is a part of me that thinks like, man, these affixes are really fun. I really like going into a boss with 30% mastery or whatever, and then just like nuking it, right? Like setting that up and then blasting the boss feels really good. And part of me wants that for the high keys as well, but I can imagine that for Dorky and Meg, if you guys have been doing the high keys this season, it's really nice that it's just like finally silence, right? Finally it's quiet and you don't have to deal with like bolstering or sanguine or voidborn or whatever affix each week that has, because like with the affix there's always these random bosses where it's just super annoying, right? Like you get a spawn of Soaky orbs on the second boss of Arakara, and it's like, what are we supposed to do about this, right? And like it must be nice to finally not have that at all in the high keys.
Yeah.
It's funny you say that.
I hate it.
Well, you hate what? You hate that?
I hate the affixes. I hate having them. Like when we
the
when
bargain
we
affixes?
like brick a key and we're like, okay, we have to push this back up. It's an 11 now, and then she spawns and you hear the voice line and you're just like,
oh, interesting.
That's
so interesting.
I have to do this again. I have to like add that back onto my plate. I'm sure DPS feel differently about it, but
that's like the opposite kind of what you're saying almost. Like,
yeah, I don't.
Well, I was going to ask them the flip side. Like, how does it feel like not having them all the time, which is kind of the flip of this, is like they added this for the community, but they clearly separated high keys and low keys. And you're saying even dipping down into the low keys where you see these things again, it's not like, oh, this will be a fun, fast 11 because we have these buffs again. It's like, man, I wish there wasn't any affixes at all. I find that
it's
super
just
interesting.
Annoyance. I think
like,
part of it is that like I find myself like for the one where you have to break the orbs, Ring of Peace no longer is a tool that I can use as a stop. I can't use it to help gather. Now it's just every 30 seconds, every 45 seconds, whatever. It's just an orb breaker, and that's all it is. And I don't really like splitting away my utility for an affix when I want to use it for the dungeon.
So in a way,
that was my issue with Prideful.
And it's giving you a positive benefit, but in your eyes, the positive benefit isn't worth it. Because just like before, like during like Ring of Peace, for example, could be you could say the exact same thing for like Sanguine. Like Sanguine exists, so I have to kind of save Ring for Sanguine and not really for stops. But even now that what Sanguine is now is a buff to everyone around you, but that doesn't even offset that. You're still just like, I would rather just use this for stops all the time, and this doesn't convolute it.
If I wasn't a healer, I think I would probably have a different opinion on it because I would get more out of it. But like I get mastery, which is just more healing, and if we're in an 11, like that's not really something that I need. So I don't feel like I gain anything from it as a healer. It's more just like, oh, now I just have to do this extra thing in addition to everything else that I'm already doing. So some of them are fine, but then you get the issue like Dratnos was talking about with the orbs that you have to soak that come in. You have like the dual boss in Stone Vault where you can't be in the middle and you're just watching all the orbs go in. Like, cool, that sucks. That's great. It reminds me of Quaking a lot, where it's just like, okay, by itself, like in a bubble, it's fine, but then the overlaps are just the most demonic thing you've ever seen. And there's like half of the dungeons have really terrible issues like that.
So Dorky, do you feel the same way when you dip down below a 12 ever? Like, is that go ahead?
Yeah, when Dratnos was talking about how like, oh, he hasn't pushed high keys this season, so like he doesn't really know what it's gonna be like. I'm literally the complete opposite. I like
you have done any low keys,
like yeah. So like I'm like I actually don't even know what doing those affixes are like anymore because it's been like so long since I've done them. Like I strictly do 12 plus because I just like don't really want to bother with fighting mobs that die in 2 seconds, because like for me personally, like it's not about the affix or the key level or whatever. Well, actually it's kind of is about the key level. I enjoy doing the 12 plus keys because that's when stuff actually lives, right? And I've been playing mostly DPS this season. I'm sure some of you guys might know.
Everyone really knows that feeling. The key too low. Key too low as the DPS is horrible. It's
I hate key too low. It is
to be
awful.
Clear, I've been spamming mostly 10s this season, but the way that me and my guild do 10s is that we will always have enough rats in the group that it's hard. Like that's the theory behind them. So we don't have the key too low syndrome. We have we're trying to do these affixes with somebody who didn't talent poison cleansing totem because they're too stupid and they're on their shaman ult or whatever, and we're trying to make it work regardless. So I don't know. Even with that phenomenon, I've been having a lot of fun with them. Like all 4 of the weeks of them, I'm glad they're there. But I wouldn't be surprised if after I push 12 ups, I then have the same feeling as Megasett, where it's like when it gets added back in, I wouldn't like it, if that makes sense, right? Like,
I'm kind of fascinated with their answer. So I mean, we were kind of talking about the affixes below a 12, but you guys kind of both seem to have convincing arguments that you think if someone were to ask the question of, okay, one thing they cooked for high keys this expansion, is you guys do not have push weeks anymore. You have the same thing every week. You guys are saying that is a success. Like, you don't want anything to be different. You guys enjoy the fact that every time you zone into a 12 plus, you know what you're getting. And like the worry for that, right, was, oh, is it going to be the same week after week? Like, because like the only thing that affixes the positive argument was they provided variance. Whether it was annoying variance or not, it was at least different. Your guys saying, at least so far, months into the season, you don't feel that. You still enjoy every time you're loading up into a key.
Yeah, I would say the biggest benefits of having this system by far is Blizzard's willingness to balance for higher keys. At least that's what it feels like. This was like something I didn't really think about when we were getting it, but these dungeons feel a lot closer tuned to, like, you know, what I would want out of a dungeon than before. Because, you know, they're not worrying about, oh, we have to balance sanguine, we have to balance bolstering, we also have to think about tyrannical in this dungeon or fortified in this dungeon. Now it's just like, you just have these dungeons and it just feels much closer balanced than before. I'm just having like a much better time with the tuning. We haven't really had many one-shots too. Like, even right now we're seeing some of the highest keys being done for the season, right? Like, we're reaching the 17s and 18s, we're reaching close to max item level. And there are actually very few one-shots in these dungeons. Like, even when I'm playing my Boomkin, which is my squishiest DPS I have, like, it's one of the squishiest DPS in the high keys, there's only like maybe a handful of things that actually one-shot and you can easily deal with them, versus Dragonflight, which was full of one-shots and you just had to constantly worry about perfect defensive management.
Yeah, dude, Tyrant and Fort both being active every week is so nice for me in the 10s. Like, it definitely does feel like I don't ever get that feeling of like, oh man, it's Tyrannical week, which is like the least good feeling in M+ for me over the last 5 years. Is there's that sinking feeling when a boss takes 4 minutes. And I don't mean, to some extent, like it's always Tyrant week, but because it's also always Fort and just with the key level, it feels more like neither than like both.
Yeah, and people had been asking for, you know, get rid of Fort, get rid of Tyrant forever, and we kind of got it, kind of not. Effectively, it is the same thing though, because you always have to deal with both, and timers are reflective of that.
Before we move off the affix thing, I just want to say, as someone who's done Mythic Plus, I think very casually this season, I've done like only 10s, and I've probably done less than 15, maybe 20 total dungeons just for gear and in crests. I have found the affixes, at least at that level, which I think I'm closer to representing the average Mythic Plus player than people who are doing them a ton. Like, I think the average Mythic Plus player like caps out at a 10, so they're like permanently seeing these affixes, right? So I'm not doing them all day every day with them, but every time I've seen one of the affixes under 12 giving like the other side of the coin, I feel like it's like, oh, that's cool. I don't know. And maybe this will not be the case in the second season or third season if they just keep running back the same things. Maybe it'll kind of have similar issues to before, but at least for now, it's like, oh, that's how that works. I haven't seen that before. And then for the 5 or 6 keys that week, it's like, that's kind of nice. I don't really worry about bad lineups. If the boss ports and then all the orbs go into it, it's a 10, so we just don't wipe to that. That's great. Who cares?
Okay, but that's only because you're playing with good players. Because like in a Pug scenario, they are wiping for sure.
Yeah,
it's just a few of my stream viewers, but yeah, I can invite some more geared ones. But yeah, in a Pug it could be really frustrating. I'm not sure. Is that from your all's? You would have a better idea than me. Is that the idea within the community of people that would just really only go ever to a 10 for max gear, and maybe they get there at some point in the season? Or is your all's take, or what you hear from them, is that these affixes are very bad and they do not like them?
Some of them are really bad. Some of them, like the heal absorb one, we get a lot of questions and peaks. They're like, how do you deal with this? Like, this happened at the exact same time as a massive AoE. I already sent my cooldown. Now what do I do? Because everyone still has this absorb shield. And the answer is unfortunately bring things that can self-dispel. But you're doing 10, so you shouldn't have to micromanage your comp that much. So that one I think gets a lot of flack. The orb one I think doesn't get as much because it's pretty easy, except for some overlaps.
Yeah, I think it's also some people are so clueless. I've had one guy ask my chat once, how do you prevent the last boss of Awkard from healing? And I'm like, what are you saying? Like, that boss doesn't heal. And I got so confused for like a good 10 minutes. And then someone in chat pipes up. It's like, oh, the healer probably let the affix go off.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's a thing. I completely forgot about that. So, yeah, like some people actually just like don't even know.
I will say the heal absorb one is definitely stupid. Like I almost always do my keys on a character that can do myself like that, like because most tanks can just get themselves, and most of the people I play with are either a good healer or can get themselves. But like I have done one key where those conditions weren't met, and it was a slog. Like every boss is getting 2 or 3 stacks of this thing, and it was taking twice as long, and that was miserable. So I feel like just in general, Blizzard balances heal absorbs that can be removed really badly. Like you can remove it with 1 global of a dispel or with 10 globals of healing. It's like, what are we doing here? It's the same with the Grim Batol heal absorb. You just look at the size of that heal absorb, and it's like, oh, okay. If I don't have a curse spell, I'm dumping 8 million healing into this thing. Like, I think the dispels are wildly unbalanced, and I think that it's kind of been like that. I didn't play much in BFA, like I did, but I wasn't really pushing. But I feel like at least in Shadowlands, curses and not having decurses is always way more punishing than not having disease or poison. I know Arakara exists, and I know that there's been like Plaguefall with disease and with poison, and that was super important. But I think like not having a decurse in Halls of Atonement for the second boss, you have to be an orc, or you have to bring a dispel, and then you have this one. And there was another like curse slash and siege. Like there's so many that are like, oh, I can't do anything about this unless I have a decurse, or I'm setting a cooldown, or we're just not doing this key if we don't have a decurse, or 2 or 3, depending on which one it is. I feel like that has been kind of bad lately.
Well, that's on like the dungeon side of things. Like that's just what the dungeon is doing to you.
Yeah.
The affix part I think is interesting because I think that was maybe something that's the same between Kiss Curse affixes and previous affixes. The one that felt the worst were ones where people felt helpless. So like warriors complain about like every affix because they're like, I just zone in and I can't do anything. Like every other class can kind of help with this in some way. I can do nothing. I have like no stops, and I have no way to like dispel myself or purge anything, whatever. Like, and they felt so bad. So like they kind of introduced that again with this. Also, they tried to put all the emphasis. They're like, okay, almost by saying, oh, you need 10 globals to dispel this, they're clearly trying to not have you heal through it. If it's like close, they're like, oh, it just becomes a healer mechanic, which I guess is kind of another thing to talk about where you said like, oh, the healer didn't heal this off. There used to be such an emphasis on healers handling the affixes in the past, and it's interesting that that's continuing in a way with at least the way they design some of these dungeons or with current affixes as well. So that's an interesting problem to solve, right? Like if you just make it closer to where you don't have to dispel, well, then no one's going to take their self-dispel talents. And then it's just like, just heal me thing. And I think they want to avoid that at all costs. So like, I think they're just stuck between a rock and a hard place there. So affixes, Dratnos was like pretty high on them, but it sounds like they are, I like them. I think they're cool, but I haven't done them all.
I was high on them, and I was kind of split between these are so good they should put them in the high keys, and these are good, but it's good that they aren't in the high keys. And I think the last 20 minutes have moved me much more in that direction of like, these are good, but it's also good that they're not in the high keys.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. Like, I think it's nice that it's not in high keys because it's like something that adds flavor, but people who are doing high keys don't have to worry about this problem, and that's nice.
Yeah, and again, I agree that the heal absorb dispel one is that one needs changes or replacement or something as well. I like the other 3 though, and again, there are specific bosses where each of them are annoying and trash bowls and stuff. But I do agree with you, Max, where it's like none of that's ever the end of the world because you're only ever dealing with that in 10s, and in 10s a viable answer is just like, I don't know, it's okay if there's one boss that's bad with one affix, and it's nowhere near as bad as like if it's in the push keys because it's 10s, right? Like you can just...
There's an argument for that because for some people 10s are push keys. It's just that there's literally less multiplicative scaling even in that scenario where a boss is getting buffed. Yeah.
You can always just move resources onto a pull like that, and it's not like they're stretched across the whole dungeon. Like if you are in a group where your 10s are your push key, something you are not doing is scraping the bottom of the barrel for every piece of value you can get out of your class's kits and stuff. And obviously that's not something that you have to do in all cases, but if there is one specific boss where you end up needing to do that, like that is actually something you can do. Whereas in the high push keys, if that happens, you sometimes end up in this hopeless spot where you think about it and you're like, I want to counter this and I can't, right? That was sometimes what it felt like with, Sanguine or Bolstering and Everbloom or something like that, which is nice that you don't have that in the high keys. And it's also nice that none of these reach the level of annoyingness that Sanguine and Bolstering would do in all key levels. Like I think a crucial variable here is that, orbs on the second boss of Arakara, for instance, it's annoying, but the worst case is less bad than the worst cases of Sanguine and Bolstering, and the counterplay is still more accessible. Like somebody can pop an immunity and run and grab that, and it happens twice in the fight, and like that is doable, right? You can do that, or defensive, or use a battle res. Like there are counterplay options that just they were much harder to execute against those other affixes. So I think it's not perfect, but I think it's much better than nothing in the affix row, just because it is nice for the keys to be different from week to week for, I think, most M+ cases that aren't pushing keys. You want to do something bad?
Yeah. I was about to throw up I was going to throw up an easy, maybe something we don't have to talk about for very long. How do we feel about the 15-second death timer?
That's what I was going to go
to. Bad.
I think it's like kind of a universal, like everyone doesn't like this, right? Like low keys, high keys. Just, I guess maybe the more interesting thing to say is, what would you guys suggest? Do you guys think we even need a death timer? Do we go back to 5 like it's been for a while? What do you guys think makes the most sense?
Even with 5, and maybe this is not coming from like a higher key perspective, even 5, I didn't feel like it was necessary, because dying and losing cooldowns or dying and losing whatever resource you were pulling, your Spy Masters, like all of that is already punishing enough. Do you really need those extra 5 seconds, those extra 15 seconds? Especially with how buggy a lot of these mechanics are, like Tredova has returned, Invisible Puddles have returned, like there's so many classes now that have like double jump or flying or something. There's always at least 2 or 3 invisible puddles. And people die to them, especially on high keys, because they hurt. So I don't think it's necessary, but I also don't think that you should be timing 15s with 30 deaths like we were kind of, I think Dragonflight, there was some that were like that, where you're just kind of running back and constantly releasing and everything. And I don't think that should be that way either. There should be a middle ground somewhere.
What do you think, Dorky?
Okay, well, here's the real question. How many wipes should we be allowed before we can time a key?
What key level?
Okay, let's just say it's something that, is challenging for your group, whatever that level that may be. You could be like 600 item level doing a 10. You could be
so like not like
doing a 14.
Bleeding edge push, but like a couple levels below that for you, right? Like
it's like it's big IO key for you.
Okay.
Well, that sounds like a bleeding edge push, right?
That does sound
sure,
like
yeah.
I still don't think
like a 10 for you.
Like, I mean, like a team that really knows what they're doing and doing an 18, and like someone who's not super confident in Mythic Plus doing a 8, like those are still like orders of magnitude of multiplicative scaling of difference. Like there's just things that one shot you and things that just, even no matter how bad you play, they're just simply not going to one shot you on an 8, right? Mm-hmm. So there's like other ways to outplay that. So I don't think those two things are the same. I think it's a false equivalency by saying like, oh, whatever your push key is, for me it's an 18 and for you it's an 8. Like, dude, no one pushing an 8 is getting one shot by this random mechanic.
Well, but you also have to realize
they're
also doing much lower damage. Like it's almost
their skill level's lower.
8.
I'm just saying it doesn't.
Right.
It's not the same. It does not skill.
You can't really compare.
Also, you should come less close to the timer if you have a clean run. Like if you are progressing +8s, it's because half your runs go really very wrong. Sideways, right? Rather than like you are consistently getting 2 minutes under the timer in a +8, right? Like, are there groups that can do that? Maybe, but those are like slightly better players with slightly worse gear, and then they get better gear, and then they're timing the keys more easily. I think that people that do kind of cap out at +8s, you should be able to do like 1.5 wipes and time the key, maybe 2. Like 2 should be like, okay, we're right on the line.
I would think that sounds about right. Like I find I struggle to believe there are people in 8s that are having 0 deaths and are like, I didn't do enough damage to time this. Like that, how would you have gotten to an 8 if that was the case, right? Like I think a lot of Mythic Plus under a 10, I think, right? I could be wrong in the comments.
I think
I'm
you'd
sure
be
they'll
surprised.
let us know.
Yeah,
maybe.
I've seen some shit. I've done some keys down there, and These guys, they don't do damage.
They might not do damage, but I think they're getting more likely absolutely slaughtered by the dungeon. And
if you are showing up and you're like, your tank is putting like a moon marker on one mob in a 2-pack and is like, okay, sheep moon, and then you fight the other mob in it by itself and you're doing it like a TBC dungeon, like, okay, you should deplete if you have any deaths in that case.
Random, like, before you even go further, comment if you have seen someone do that this expansion in a key. I'm literally talking like marking something to be CC'd and then pulling it the whole dungeon. Anyways, keep going.
Yeah, basically, like, if you're pulling like normal, not super aggro, normal, medium, 1 to 2 pulls at a time, I think, 1.5 wipes should be the line for like where it becomes the timer is over. And right now, I feel like it's too tight when people start dying, and even in like a +9 push key or whatever. And then I think that if you're pushing a +18 world first, it's reasonable to expect no deaths in that situation. I think that's the kind of thing where it's like, okay, if we're trying to get the world first +18 key, like 1 death should be bad, 2 deaths should be really bad, and like a full wipe should cost us, right?
Yeah.
I would say deaths are reasonable or acceptable in like even the bleeding edge keys.
Yeah.
I think it's mostly just wipes that are problematic,
or like a death without a res on a boss, right?
Yeah, because like if someone dies and you just battle res them, then it's like it's really not the end of the world. But whenever you hard wipe and you, like Meg said, like you're losing spy masters, you're losing all your resources, you might have lost bloodlust, and you have things to do to run back, like that's where the real time loss comes from.
Well, then shouldn't you ask the opposite of the question we're asking? You shouldn't ask how many wipes should you have right now. It is, okay, let's remove the death timer in a, whatever we're talking about, a bleeding edge key for your skill level. If you remove the 15-second death timer, would that then allow you to maybe wipe 4 or 5 times and still potentially time the key? I'm just making up a number, but in support of saying, well, there shouldn't be any death timer penalty, does that sound right to you? Right, that's the difference between last expansion and this expansion. Clearly, you can mess up less now because there's just a stricter penalty on dying and wiping. But we're asking if the alternative is, okay, Challenger's Peril is bad, remove it. Well, do you think that it makes sense for a bleeding edge key for your skill level to wipe maybe 5 or 6 times and still time it? Megasett almost alluded to that not seeming right either. So is there another way to punish you for deaths, and like what actually is the right number for all skill levels?
Personally, I don't think it should come from deaths. I think it should just come from the timer being naturally tight. Like it should just be the case where, all right, you guys didn't do enough damage or you guys didn't pull large enough, you shouldn't be able to time it. But death, like it shouldn't be a thing where players are okay with dying. And maybe not okay is the right word, but you know how like when you're doing keys, there are people who don't really think about their deaths very much. They might be not in their cooldowns, and then like they die, like, oh, just battle res them, get them back up. Like I don't think that should be okay. Or if you're doing death skips, death skips might not be an okay option. Like I like death skips and all, but that shouldn't be a part of the game to just like be able to just like die and get rezzed, and or like in the boss fight you're just dying and just like it's fine just to just sacrifice people and just res them.
So you are pro death timer.
Should just be tighter.
Well,
yeah,
actually,
like, I think
have the timers in keys for how much you're doing in the keys and how long the timer is. Do you think that they are relatively much longer timers compared to Dragonflight because the death timer exists? Do you think that happened? Or do you think that the timers, like the 35 minutes or 40 minutes, however long you have to do the dungeon, like, do you think that has stayed the same and only the death timer have changed? Or do you think the timers are actually not including the recent change, the like 90-second thing, like how it was at the beginning of the expansion? Like, do you think these timers accounted for that? Because that's the only thing that could possibly be relevant to your answer, right? Like with the whole, it should just be about timing the key and you shouldn't worry, or you should have to worry about deaths, I guess, right?
I don't think
I think the reason that we worry... Sorry.
Oh, no, you go. I was just like thinking about it.
I think that the reason that we worry about deaths in like hierarchies isn't necessarily because of the death timer, like that adds up and it gets annoying when you lose, one person gets meleeed because they started attacking too early, one person got by swirly, 2 miss kicks, whatever, like deaths here and there. That's annoying when it adds up to like a minute at the end of the key. You're like, oh, okay. But again, it's like more detrimental when you do a pull, someone dies immediately, they popped all their cooldowns, now that mob's not going to die, the prio mob, and he's going to kill everyone else. So it's not like that one 15-second death was super detrimental to us, but it was more that we got 4 other deaths off of that because the lava bender didn't die, or because we didn't end up having enough kicks when this one person died. So I don't really know how they decide the timers and everything, but I think that's the way we approach it.
The way I see the difference between Challenger's Peril and not Challenger's Peril isn't any of those constructions we've used so far. It's like, imagine a run that had 10 deaths but was 2 minutes faster because you pulled a little bit more aggressively. And then a run that had 0 deaths and was 2 minutes slower because it pulled less aggressively. Like, which of these do we want to have a better timer? Which of these do we want to let time the key or not, right? 10 deaths is, 100 seconds worse with Challenger's Peril than without it, right? So that's a little bit less than 2 minutes, but it's close, right? It's about 2 minutes. And in my opinion, like, those runs are more fun for me. I have more fun in a run with 10 deaths where we're pulling a little bigger than I do in a run with 0 deaths where we're pulling exactly 1 pack at a time or something like that. Like, that is a much less fun game for me. So that's the biggest reason why I'm a hater on Challenger's Peril, is like, I think that the risk reward for dying, as you elaborated really well, Megasett, it's not just like the 5 or 15 seconds. Like, you are causing a lot of other problems in your key already. We don't need to add an extra 10 seconds per death of punishment for it. Like, it's already bad if people are dying, but we don't want to move the incentive such that you now are only going to accept like a 0.5% chance of somebody dying on a pull instead of a 2% chance, right? Like, having that chance of death be a little bit higher makes the pulls more fun for me, and I'm sad that they are incentivizing me to not do that.
It definitely feels like they're trying to limit like the size of pulls that people do and how much people are pulling at once. Like, from what is it, challenge modes was like the first version of Mythic Plus that we had, from WOD to, or MOP to now. It feels like they've just kind of been like corralling Mythic Plus players into like the smaller box, so it's easier to balance, it's easier to manage, but it also has become like a little less fun because you don't get to do crazy stuff. It's not the Wild West anymore. So I kind of wish they would like loosen the reins on that a little bit, I think.
I feel like we've been saying that for years.
It's good. I think it's good that we're not in WOD Legion levels of like big pull.
What would you say is the perfect level?
I think like a little bit less than BFA pull sizing, maybe, or right around BFA pull sizing. That was the golden age.
Like Shadowlands, maybe.
Shadowlands is a bit too little for me, especially early Shadowlands. More than Shadowlands, lesser about the same as BFA.
Yeah. Before we move to
BFA.
pull size,
happy time.
So I think Dratnos' Challenger's Peril, I'd like to be incentivized to maybe pull bigger and okay with making mistakes, and that makes my dungeon more fun. And you two sound like you're in the middle of, there's a reason it exists. I also understand why it wouldn't exist, but like, where do you guys actually sit? Like, what do you think Blizzard should do? What should they do at Challenger's Peril? If you're a developer for one day and they're like, fix Challenger's Peril, what do you do?
Okay, my suggestion is everyone should have 1 free death. That way, like, if you die once, then you lose that. You don't lose that 15 seconds. But if you're like persistently dying, then you will lose 15 seconds from each subsequent death. I don't like the 60 seconds added as a band-aid.
90.
Yeah,
right?
It felt kind of lazy.
Yeah.
Like,
well, that's the only real difference with that, I guess, is the it's 6 deaths between your team instead of 1 death per person.
And you don't get rewarded for a 0 death run versus a 5 death run.
Yeah, I think that's pretty minor, but
it's pretty minor, except in very high push keys. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So you keep the 15-second timer. It's just everyone gets 1 free whoopsie.
Yeah, because like shit happens, right? Like sometimes there's an invisible swirly, or like somebody misses their kick, but at the same time there's an AoE going off, so they just happen to get wombo comboed. And I think like deaths happen, and I think it's acceptable to have some deaths, but like Meg said, I also think it's pretty bad if you just have people who are timing keys with 20 deaths in a run.
Okay, I like that. Okay, let's go to the fun stuff. Pull sizes. That does seem like what did that person say in that one Blizzard thing? They were like, "You think you do, but you don't." Thing. Does anyone remember what that was from?
That was for Classic.
Was that for Classic?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I think that is a little bit. So, like, I heard this from Mythic Plus a few years ago. They're like, "Dude, I don't think they get it. I just want to pull like 20 mobs on every single pull." And I'm like, I don't think you want that. Like, I love that. I love playing on Holy, like during Reaping. Like, Reaping kind of felt like that, or maybe the closest thing to that. And that definitely would get old. I think 20 mob plus massive pulls should happen because, man, that's fun. But I also think it's like, Dratnos, you made an analogy for this one time. It's like, go, do the analogy.
No, you can steal it. Go ahead.
No, I actually don't remember what it is.
Okay, I was going to say
something about like eating too much dessert, right?
Exactly. It's eating dessert, right? Like, I really like having one or two of those every dungeon or two or something like that, or like some dungeons in the pool. Like Algathar, you think about the first pull of Algathar Academy, and it's like really
love
great
that favorite part of the dungeon.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's super fun.
Well,
but
you see, the thing, Dratnos, is I'm a fatty. I just want to have as much cake.
I don't think you would.
Ice cream.
I think you would. I think you do want every pull to be like the first pull of Algathar, but then after doing that for like a week or a month, you'd be like, okay, I want to have that happen for sure, and more than it is now, but just not every pull.
Okay, so as a DPS main this season, I would say what I've learned to really want is I just want to be able to play the game. You know, like, is that too much to ask for? Like, I want to be able to fucking cast. I want to be able to attack the mobs. I don't want shit all over me, constantly having to move out of melee, constantly having to cancel my cast, constantly having to go to bear form, constantly having to worry about every single kick, or if one singular cast goes off, I instantly implode. I just want to be able to play the game, have like a little bit less damage going on, a little bit less chaos going on. Like, I'm able to play the game so much more when I'm rating, for example. Like, why the hell can I not play the game when I'm doing M+?
Is that more about pull size, or is that more about
there's too much going on in
it's the game's direction of just making every single mob do more in a dungeon, right?
Yeah, too many casters.
Really bad about that.
And that's also
That's
at the same
worst.
time what prevents you from pulling super big sometimes too, outside of tank damage. But and that's another angle to go. We definitely need to get into that later with a healer and a tank present. Well, you haven't really been tanking this, but you tanked a lot, you would know.
Yeah, screw tanking.
Yeah, dude, believe me, I did that a couple of years ago. I was like, always tank, but only because I had to. And as soon as you get the reins off and you can just DPS, it's like, why would you ever go back, man? It's just so sick. You just get to kill everything.
Yeah, I just want to do damage.
It's so much more fun. It's actually bad how much more fun being a DPS is rather than tank or healer.
Yep.
Well, so how do you feel about healing this season, Meg?
I'm still MISTWEAVER, so there's
What does that mean?
I
It's
don't
like not good enough? Is it not meta right now or something?
No. I mean, like, we had a really good Dragonflight, and we got a lot of good changes, and we had some pretty good tuning, like Season 3, Season 4. Resto Druid was still technically better. It usually is when MISTWEAVER is also good. But especially, so we got a Life Cocoon buff in 0.5, but prior to that, I had nothing for my tank. My Absorb Shield was like 2 mil. Like, I have like 5.8 or something. My tank has like 8 mil. What's 2 mil going to do against a tank buster that's hitting him for 10? I feel like healer externals kind of suck. And then the tanks not being as tanky as they were with all of the tank busters that we have in these dungeons. It's like kind of furthering the issue of healer balance and not having the same kit. It just feels a lot worse than it has in the past, especially competing against like Disc Priest with 2 PIs or 2 PS and 1 PI. Yeah.
The power difference between a pain suppression and a life cocoon is insane. Like, insanely different. Even like time dial, which is like technically your biggest DR, you have to deal with that still. Like, you're gonna have to heal in a big pull. You have to heal that off. Like, it almost doesn't even feel like a cooldown in a lot of scenarios.
Yeah,
but like
it'll prevent the one shot.
2 charges of pain suppression and just like lining up the value of that in a dungeon versus life cocoon is crazy. Like, it's just so much better.
Yeah. I guess, like, I like MISTWEAVER. I like where it's at. I don't necessarily like healing, and I have not been pugging healing keys at all. Like, outside of the first week, we did almost all guild keys, so I didn't get to deal with the pugs in LFG for like learning 10s while we're under geared. And then now it's like I'm not really gonna join a group unless I know at least one person in there, because healing pugs is just not fun when they don't kick, they don't use defensives, and they're like, bro, one heal. And it's like, okay, like we joke about one heal in like groups, but they're not kidding, like they're serious, they're like just one heal.
I actually, while we have a healer here, I want to ask you something that someone brought up in my chat and I thought was fascinating, because someone in my chat was like, dude, healers are always so defensive, and then someone brought up that healers are designed to be defensive, because if you think about the way that like blame is assigned in a key, there's so many things that could happen, but if you mess up, you could technically be healed through like almost anything. So you learn to find out that maybe it wasn't all the way my fault. Maybe that healer could have healed me through that. So anytime someone dies, a healer almost feels like they have to be, I guess sounds stupid, like pre-defensive, like you have to be like you could have done something better to do that, and that might be true, and maybe you could have healed them through it, but it's like a both ways process. But a lot of time that blame ends up on the healer, and you feel like you have to, and you know that because you're the one staring at the health bars the whole time. It's probably very obvious to you when someone stands in something, right? Like super obvious, maybe even more than they know if they exactly got hit by something, and you almost feel like you have to set the record straight after mistakes, and that makes healers seem defensive and combative, but it's really just the way that like dungeons work, like how that kind of stuff goes out. Do you feel that?
I definitely record video, like our runs. Even if I'm not streaming, I will record just so when someone's like, what did I die to, I know what happened, but I need them to see it, right? Like there was 2 kicks going off, and then there's AoE casting, and you didn't see the AoE casting, and then you didn't press anything, and then you're just dead. So it's like, could I have cocooned you there? Yeah, but my tank needs it. So you needed to be more aware. But it's also like, I don't want to sound like I'm blaming them, even though I kind of am. Like, I don't know. It's a hard thing to not sound like an asshole to do. But we do get it in peaks a lot where people come in, they're like, what do I do here? Like, how do you heal through this? I'm like, oh, they just let every single kick go off. Like, this wasn't your fault. That I think people have a hard time, especially pugging, knowing if it's their fault or not, because like you said, they do always get the blame, whether it's warranted or not.
Well, I think you did the right thing, right? You said, oh, could I have used Life Cocoon on you? Yes, but like that's not something you're just going to assign and say like, oh, if you're going to go back and play it perfectly. Like you have to acknowledge where they could have played better, and then also acknowledge like, yeah, I maybe could have done something there, but also like, you know, there was more going on than just you not getting healed. Dorothy, you were gonna step in and say something, I think, when I asked her that question. Do you remember what it was? Or
yeah, would you prefer if it was more about healer responsibility? You know, so like we take away some of the kicks, we take away some of the defensives from the players, but that naturally means that, like, you know, it'll be more burden placed on the healer, right? Because like, all right, well, I mean, like, if I'm not able to press my defensive to live this, and if I don't have enough like kicks or stops to deal with these bolts, and it just becomes like a healer problem, right? Like, would that be better if the healer was able to manage more, was able to have like more control over people living or dying?
I do wish that I had more impact on my group living or dying. I feel like Og almost has more control than I do. Like, I can do healing, but I'm not going to be able to really do much if I don't have cooldowns, because our spot healing is kind of right now. I have 1 external, technically 2, but that's also my main healing cooldown. So there's some times where I'm just sitting there, I'm looking at low health bars, I see a mechanic coming, I'm like, I don't have anything for this. Like, there's nothing that I can do about this. Especially like the first things that come to mind, we struggled a lot in Dawnbreaker, was the first boss, was when my tank was playing Bear. He would get one shot through Cocoon before they buffed it. So I'm like, that's all I got. Can't do anything about it. Like, we can bring an Og, we can grab a priest for that little bit of health, but there's like nothing I can do. And I think in Dragonflight, I felt helpless a lot too when it came to just preventing the one shots, because I had one thing every 1 minute and that's it. So it's like, I'm just here.
Would you prefer
I'm here to heal.
healers were more powerful?
Yes,
Like, you know,
I think that more
like
people
heals,
would
you just
play
do way
healers.
more.
what does that mean?
Yeah.
Like basically you have a abundance of riches of healing, which means every healer can heal through basically every reasonable damage intake. And I guess the meta of what healer is currently best is not, are you able to possibly heal this thing? It's maybe how much more damage could you do? How many more free damage globals can you get because you're more efficient at doing that abundance of healing? So it's just like increasing the overall healer power. So at least everything's viable, and the meta is less about binary living or dying and more about like which thing is slightly better once that is also true if you play correctly.
Yeah, because I mean, like, I understand from Blizzard's perspective, right? If this happens every expansion, Blizzard cares about healers not being too powerful because they find it hard to balance surviving and dying, right? Like they want to be able to kill players. They want to like, and how do you challenge players if healers are healing for infinite? By just like adding more one shots, right? And by making damage spikier. But is that the direction? Like, do we care about challenging the players as much as Blizzard wants? I guess is like maybe the question I'm asking, because I feel like there's nothing inherently wrong with just making healers powerful and making dungeons not super spiky, right?
We had Court of Stars. Do you guys remember Court of Stars pre-nerf Dragonfly Season 1?
Yep.
Yeah.
Where it was like your healer has to figure it out on the last 2 bosses, right? And it's like it's not one-shotting you. It's you're dying over 10 seconds, right? And like I remember a lot of the Reddit threads I was reading at the time were like healers that were like, yeah, I can't do this, right? Like I don't know. I think like it's tough.
We do have problems a lot where we end up with like one boss, like Talisay, I think was the third boss of court, and then the last boss, and then you had the third boss of halls, where it's like, okay, the whole first part of the dungeon was kind of fine. You're kind of half awake, half not, because there's not really healing to do. You get to that boss and you're just getting destroyed. But that's the only boss that does that in the entire dungeon pool. So you never really need to learn how to do it as long as you can get all the other dungeons on a high enough level. So I feel like they need to make more heal check bosses like that third boss of halls or like the second boss of court. But there's going to be some really bad growing pains for healers that have kind of been coasting through lower keys. But they'll need to figure it out. But I do think that they need to be stronger to do that, right? You can't just be like, okay, here's all these heal checks, but we're not changing anything about the way you heal. There's going to be... There's got to be some change, I think.
Especially the Court of Stars problem as well was that a lot of dealing with Court of Stars, like I would say like 70% of healing the last boss was your group is pressing defensives in a nice staggered and consistent fashion so that you have coverage on all, and that was something that just did not exist in like pug keys, right? And so like you were playing it 4 times harder than if you had good players as your DPS.
We had Halls of Valor was season 1, right? For the Dragonflight?
Yep.
Yeah.
On Herja, you had Nature's Vigil, you had Vampiric Embrace, you had AG, you had AMZ maybe, or a Paladin. I had like 0 control over it. Monk was in a not great spot, but I had to go in there with those specs if we were going to kill Herja. Not even talking about Odin, like that was its own problem. But I was so reliant on the group to have those tools that it felt terrible. Same with Temple of the Jade Serpent. You need a decurse, you need a second dispel, you need a lust. That's your DPS comp decided already. And then you're the monk, and then you have the tank. So it's like the comp restrictions really sucked. And I think that that's part of why I feel helpless a lot of times is because monk tends to not have the things that people want.
They also just need to...
Whatever.
They need to figure out how to make cool things like curse dispels and just things like that. So often they become, you need to have this or you cannot do this key.
Yep.
And they need to make it where, because they can't just make it the opposite where like it doesn't matter if you have a curse spell. Like you can talent that. They need to make it matter, but they need to make it like feel like it is an okay benefit to have a curse spell here, but never like I think the scenario where it is you don't have this, you are fucked kind of thing is just kind of objectively bad with only 5 people being able to be in a group, and I don't really know how they do that.
I mean, but like making it not matter should still be okay, right? I don't know. I feel like
I think from a design perspective, they will literally never let that happen. Like you have curse dispels for some classes, and that is something that your class can do, and you want to feel good about having that. They care so much about that. I think there's also merit for that making sense too. I just think
but we do have stuff like that in the game right now. Like it exists. Like the poison dispels that exist in some of these dungeons. Like sure, they're not required. They're not like required, but at the same time, they're not completely nothing.
Like you cannot have a poison dispel. So you're saying that they do poison dispels better than curses?
Yeah.
It's literally just
curses
a design
so
like
you're
just making curses too strong. That's pretty simple
it's
feedback.
like you know, like you look at City of Threads, right? Like like the big mini boss does it. It's like Venom blow up thing, and like everyone's like dying, but you can still live through it. It's just it's much nicer to have a poison dispel. Whereas if you go into Halls of Atonement or Grim Battle, and if you don't have a curse dispel, then it's like, well, I mean, you're kind of just shit out of luck.
Yeah. I think Stonebolt is probably the worst offender, because at least you could heal through the shields if you send a cooldown, but you get 1 curse, 2 curses on someone, and that first pull of Stonebolt, like, it's over. That's the dungeon, is that just having the decurses for the I can't remember the name of the mobs, little dwarves.
Yeah, so curses, main point of feedback from the PoddyC official feedback, curses are too strong. Make them less strong.
Yes.
And make curse spells matter, but just not as much as they do now. Not a
Right.
binary.
Literally just a number. It's a number issue, right? Just make the cost of not having a curse spell lower by making the numbers on the curses smaller. And poisons, I think, are at an okayer spot, a better spot.
Poisons have kind of always been done well that way. They always seem like it's like a 5-second dot you can deal with, but sucks. That's like the average poison thing, is like it does a little bit extra damage to you, and if you have a dispel, it's fine and it's great to like stay alive, but it's never been like if you don't have this, you're fucked. It's pretty
They
rare.
could also do what they did in Dawnbreakers, the ensnaring shadows. It's a slow, so you can Tiger's Lust it, you can freedom it, but it is a curse. So if you don't have,
That's a really good
curse,
point.
you can just get rid of it. So there could be multiple ways to get rid of something, which I would be fine with if they want it to be strong. But it can't be a strong decurse. It needs to be a strong debuff that has like 1 or 2 or 3 solutions, maybe.
I want to ask, definitely since we have Megasett here, I want to ask her this. I think Dorky will have some perspective, less this season than normal. But they made a bunch of tank changes going into this expansion, right? I think Mythic Plus is probably maybe one of the things where this has had the biggest impact. I just want to hear from a healer that they made tanks require more healing. They made them less tanky. How has that been as a healer to do? Do you find that interesting that you have to heal the tanks more, or do you not like it? What are your thoughts on it?
I think I have maybe a little bit of privilege being a Mistweaver with this, because I do spend most of my time DPSing, and a lot of that Ancient Teachings healing is actually kind of passive, just with me doing damage. And it's a pseudo smart heal, so it splits evenly among injured targets. If my tank's the only one injured, then he's just getting all of it, which is a decent amount. But I do always use them as like an anchor for any splash healing. Like Shaylan's is an AoE that is targeted, so I target the tank. If I'm using my Chi-Ji, my enveloping mist goes on them, which has splash healing. Like they're always my anchor for stuff, but I still don't feel like I have to do anything to them outside of Cocoon if they're going to get one shot by something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think the tank changes have accomplished their goals whatsoever. So maybe we can pull it up. Is there where?
Yeah, I can pull it.
They did have stated goals for sure, and I definitely think they've been short of those. Yeah.
Yeah, like so they specifically said something along the lines of slowing down damage intake and just like, making it more gradual, which is completely false, by the way. Damage is just as spiky as before. It's just not one-shotty.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is this? You can put this in the broadcast?
Like, this is awesome.
No way. This is insane.
Now we have to open this ourselves.
It's going to look the same to the viewers, and of course it's going to look the same to listeners because they can't see anything, but it's going to... we have new tech on our end where instead of just saying Frank pull this up and then hoping it gets pulled up, I can share it to our... He got a new... This is where our Patreon money's going to. We've got a subscription to a new way of recording now. But
Thanks,
yeah.
Let's look at all the bullet points.
The bullet points are: tanks will take more damage overall, but shouldn't die significantly more often.
That one's wrong.
Tank damage intake should be steady and not too fast.
That one's also wrong.
Tanks will have strong answers to threats or periods of danger, but less sustained self-healing.
That's kind of true.
Healer gameplay should not be dominated by tank healing.
That's kind of true.
Well,
tank gameplay should not significantly change or require actions like kiting to survive.
That one's wrong.
You want to ask DHs about that one?
Well, yeah. What if it requires switching to a protection spec tank instead of a vengeance spec tank? That worked pretty well.
That's a solution. Yep.
Yeah, that's I do think that like playing warrior personally feels exactly the same as before in terms of how durable I am, but then playing some of the other ones not as much.
So it seems like the only thing that they hit on was tanks will have strong answers to threats, but less sustained self-healing. That is correct. But healer gameplay should not be dominated by tank healing. She said as a Mistweaver, you're kind of just like playing the game the same anyway. It doesn't feel any different, but I wonder for other healers if they have to feel like they have to spend too much into tanks.
I would say maybe a Resto Shaman a little bit from my experience.
Dratnos Shaman has been healing 10s, and the only difference I've been dumping a couple extra healing surges into the tanks than in Dragonflight, and also my Earth Shield is now living on my tank instead of on my squishiest DPS, which is not like a huge difference, but it's definitely like if I don't put my Earth Shield on my tank, they're dying, whereas that wasn't true in Dragonflight. I actually think that's kind of fine. I don't know. It hasn't felt bad for me on the healing end, but I also haven't been doing high keys. I've been healing 10s, so grain of salt.
Well,
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
think
your
that
tanks are
part's fine.
probably taking a decent amount of damage in 10s too, because they're not going to be properly getting, their cooldowns up. They're not going to be calling for externals from anyone. So it might kind of shake out the same.
Definitely possible. Yeah, I'm not good enough at healing to really know. I just I roll up there and I tell people like, look, you're gonna have to kick because I'm lava bursting. So it's a personal issue. Yeah.
The official PODDY feedback then for Blizzard, if they were listening to us, would be the tank changes did not accomplish what they wanted to, and maybe were not great. I don't know if it's like a full reversion, but it just seems like tanking is just less fun than it was before. Is that true, Dorky?
Oh well, so I would say the biggest thing by far is we're not able to play as many specs as we would like.
Yeah, I would say like land on the warrior balancing. Like buff other tanks up to warrior durability, not nerf warrior durability.
Well, how does warrior durability feel? Is it like not as tanky as BFA warrior, and it's still a little weaker, and it feels like the changes were added, but in a good way, and it just affected other tanks worse?
Yeah, but warrior definitely requires some level of healing at the highest keys, but it's not like, oh no, I am dead as hell and I can't do anything about this. Whereas, so I'm comparing this to what tanking was like before the changes during beta. Now I know this was like quite a while ago, but when I was tanking during beta, tank changes, it felt pretty good, right? Like it felt like you could play almost every tank. All the tanks felt within each other's margin. Like surviving wasn't their primary problem. It was more about like, oh, which tank does more damage, or which tank has better utility, or which raid buffs these tanks bring. And it felt nice to be able to just like go through different tanks and play them. But right now, it feels like if you're not playing a prot paladin or a prot warrior, you may as well not play M+.
In high keys. But also
in high keys, yeah. Well, but like even that kind of trickles down.
Well, tank damage is one of those things that definitely, like, there's a cap at what tanks can play, and there's a key level where you could play as bad as possible, and, like, you can kind of just get auto-attacked and healed through it, and there is, like, everything in between. I think it definitely scales a lot for tanks. Like, even if you're just so bad, you're not going to go into a 2 and die to tank damage. Like, that's just not how that works.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to ask you guys one question, and you can elaborate it on as much as possible. It can be a discussion before we move on to the next person, but I want all four of us to come up with something that, and it's okay if we have the same answer too. What do you guys think is the biggest problem in Mythic Plus right now? It can be high keys, it can be low keys, it can be both. What would you say you think is the biggest problem in Mythic Plus that they should address? I have one, but I can wait until you guys are done. If anyone feels like they have a banger, go for it.
I feel like there's so many.
I have one.
Like there could be like 5.
I have one, and I think it is, like, in my opinion, which is probably certainly less important than you all who do more of them. But I have one where I think it's, like, by far the biggest problem. I also have no idea how to solve it. I guess I'll go ahead and do it. I think the biggest problem by far is how important and how good your class has to be to get invited. So
yeah, I was gonna lean towards that one too.
Because, like, if you think about raid, like, people don't care. Why do people care about tuning, right? Why do people always talk about tuning? In raid, like, things are generally pretty balanced. Like, there's a good class or 2 or 3 or 4, like, every tier, but, like, there's outliers in both directions. But, like, you get invited to a raid, mainly because, like, every class is a raid buff, kind of. And the one class that kind of doesn't is just always good and sick in raid, and you need grips and stuff. But, like, you don't really worry about that, because when you go to the group finder, you can just get invited. Any class in the game. You can get invited to an AOTC group or whatever group you are signing up for. You have just as much of a chance to get invited as, like, other classes. Maybe like a little bit barring, like, whatever the meta OP thing is. But, like, people just don't make pug raids and they're like, all right, we're going to invite 5 of this thing. Like, no, they're going to invite people with experience and give you the best class. Why do people, Mythic Plusers, care about tuning so much? Well, it's because you can't, in raid, you can be average and you at least get invited. In Mythic Plus, you don't. If you are average in Mythic Plus, your in quotes queue times are forever. You can get declined from 15 groups or whatever before you get invited to where someone finally takes in your poor soul of just being as good as the average of every class in the game. The reality is you're only happy if you are, like, I'm just going to make this up, like the 80th or plus percentile of specs in your relative role of getting invited. because it just means you can play the game. You can sign up for a group and you can get in queue, and it actually goes through, and the queue time is shorter, the better your class is. So I don't, and this is why I said I don't really have a solution. Solo queue Mythic Plus is a solution to this, and I think it's the only reason it gets talked about, but that's such an extreme, like, totally different mode that they'd have to make and whatever. But the reason I've always liked that is it directly solves that problem. I don't know how they can solve it without it. Like, maybe it's just the fact that you can make a group in the group finder. Like, think about in League of Legends. Like, this actually happened a few years ago where, like, people would just dodge games if they didn't get their preferred meta champ in a certain lane. But imagine if you made League games not by queuing for it, but making a group in the group finder, and you're only going to accept the best top laner, the best AD carry, the best mid laner, whatever. That would take forever, and if you weren't one of those meta champs as your preferred hero, you would fucking hate that, and it would be the biggest problem in League that needed to get solved. That's what WoW's going through. Like, I think the biggest issue is just you just can't if you're a one trick Megasett, right? There's you love Monk. Okay, you play other things, but like you really look forward. If everything was the same, you would play Monk every season, right? Like that's your shit. Okay? There are another group of people that actually look forward to the meta being different every season, because then for them that gives them variety. Oh, this season this class is better. Okay, I can make one of those and learn new things, and that's fun for me, right? Like there's a bunch of different people who play for different reasons, but the fact that you can't like get invited on your class or the class that you have the most fun playing absolutely sucks. I know I've been kind of talking about it for a while, but I don't know if you guys have any proposed solutions or thoughts about that.
I think something that would... Yeah, you can go ahead.
I was just going to say I felt the same, but you go.
I think something that wouldn't 100% remedy it, because people are still going to take the DPS to do the most damage. But, and I know I've already talked about Final Fantasy already, but there's kind of this idea that everyone has kind of the same tools. Like every tank has an AoE mitigation. Every healer can be res because it's like a casted, it's a little different, but it's a casted res in combat. And then I don't even remember what the DPS get because I never played one. But they all have kind of similar tools. And I think that Lust and Brez should just be tools that you get by going into Mythic Plus. They should just be things available to you regardless of your spec. Because it does get kind of hard. I think season 1 of Dragonflight was when Evoker and Shaman were in the MDI. I think Mistweaver could have been in there, but both of the healers were Lusts, and you weren't going to give that up. So I think that it would help alleviate some of it, because it's like, oh, well, you know, we would take you because we don't mind Mistweaver, but we do really want Brez. And that sucks when that happens, or Lust, or, you know, whatever it ends up being. I think that having role abilities would alleviate some of it, but I don't think it would fix much for DPS. Maybe the Lust thing, but...
Well, that's interesting. We actually had something close to that. Like back when Lust drums were a lot stronger, you didn't... I mean, there was definitely a time where you could not have a Lust class, and that was... It wasn't the best, but that was okay. You would sign up for and do that key without a Lust, and you would just use drums, because drums were like, what, 5% worse than regular
like
Lust?
25%.
Yeah, and then they nerfed it on purpose, so you wanted to go out and get one of those Lusts. The problem is it's so restrictive that that's the exact problem we're talking about, right? It creates that restriction in Battle Res. I think Blizzard probably cares too much about your class lore-wise needing to line up, like being a paladin or whatever, a DK raised dead. Like there's probably some classes where they would that would go against a lot of the RPG things, but I completely agree with you gameplay-wise. I mean, it'd be hard not to.
Yeah.
The engineering jumper cables currently scare somebody into not pretending they're dead anymore. You're telling me we can't have battle resing shout for warriors? Okay, dude. All right.
I mean, warriors don't have bloodlust.
Yeah,
like that sounds like such a warrior ability, and it's
you should be able to just scream and everyone gets
Yeah.
hype and then cast their shit faster.
They could make it work. I think that, like, I'm not a lore person. I don't seek it out. But some of it, it's like, okay, Monk has an ability called Soothing Mist. We finally have a Soothe, because that makes sense. So there's like this weird part where people will be like, oh, this doesn't make sense flavor-wise. I'm like, I don't really care, because I would like to play the game. But then there's others that it's just like, okay, no, that doesn't really make any sense. So I don't know. It's a complicated problem, and I don't think you can make competitive players and casual players happy with it, because they're going to be like really pissed off. Like Essence Font got removed. There's a lot of casual Mistweavers that are really mad about that, because it was a pretty button to press. So there's always going to be someone that's mad, but if it is contained only in Mythic Plus as like a dungeon ability, I feel like it would be okay.
I think also just drums back to 25% would go a long way. Like
scrolls, I want fort buff as a monk, please.
Yeah, those all are still things that I get why they did them, but I'm sad. I wish it wasn't that way.
There's two things Frank just brought up that are that I find fascinating. Number one, he mentioned that priests' ability to battle res someone would just be life gripping them if it's off cooldown. It just grips them back alive. That would be hilarious. And it like grips them to where you are. That would be sick. But he did mention this because we talked about racials last episode, right? And we were like, they should just make all the things, whatever. So I actually didn't know this. What were some of the, did you read any of those comments, Dratnos? Do you know what he's talking about?
Nope.
I mean, a lot of them were kind of just like, oh, you know, I like Shadow Meld because of how buggy the game is. I want to be able to leave combat, so let me keep my Shadow Meld. Which, I mean, I don't know, I think it's completely fine. Like, none of them were in the context of competitive, or not competitive, but like, you know.
Well, it'd be non-competitive. So what we were saying is like, we wondered if people felt like it would suck if everyone could choose Blood Fury or Shadow Meld and not be a Night Elf, because that's, in my mind, that is Night Elf to me. And I wonder if we got any comments, which is maybe what Frank's alluding to, where they were like, you know what? It is important to me that Night Elves have Shadow Meld and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think to most of them, they just see it as like, you know, don't take away my Shadow Meld.
Oh, no,
Frank says,
yeah,
okay.
No,
okay, I'll go. Most of them were around the line of, I've been XYZ for so long, it would feel really weird if I saw a Night Elf using Stone Form, which, that's fair. It would look weird, but...
Which is kind of what I was assuming people would feel like, that we wouldn't think, but like a lot of people, it matters to them. But
I feel like it's much less weird than like Horde and Alliance cross-faction groups, though, and
yeah, that's kind of true, too.
We've gotten over that.
Yeah, I mean,
that was like... one where I never accepted the alternative answer. I was just like, if you think that factions need to be in this game, you're wrong. I was not willing to accept another perspective.
But that's like such a core part of the game.
Yeah, no.
Cannibalism is not undead is fair.
Yeah,
that's kind of crazy.
And someone's like, "What about that?" I'm like, yeah, maybe they could reflavor.
Oh, you made a tweet
somehow.
about this.
I did a while ago. I did like a mock-up on what it could look like in the talent tree, where it'd be you pick 2 passive, 1 active, just like PvP talents, but like having cannibalism as a non-undead would be probably bad.
You could just
like
reskin it though.
What kind of a response did you get
like
to this, by the way, in your replies?
The number 1 response, I think, was from Flex, and it said, "It's a great idea, but it reduces their profit, so it has been rejected." And he had a point.
I don't even think that's true. I think they would make a ton of money by allowing you to...
As soon as they added this change, I would immediately buy 10 race changes, but I would also stop race changing my characters as often. So long term, maybe it would lose the money. I don't know.
I think that's a completely moot point. It could maybe make them less money or more. I don't think there's anything.
Yeah, I think it's like the subset of the population that changed their race for player power is a pretty small subset.
Here's what I would say. This is a great idea, but it reduces Blizzard's profit, so it has been rejected. I think one thing that has what is things that have never happened for 1000 is them bringing this up and someone being like, no, we can't do that because it would make us this specific thing, and it's because make us that there's no way that happened, right? I think there is something they would knock it down with, and maybe it's what people were talking about in our comment section of it not feeling like Warcraft.
Yeah,
but I don't think it was a money thing. Not to mention that they wouldn't make decisions based on money. They certainly fucking do that.
Yeah.
Shout out the Brutosaur, but
there's a ton of people that are just like, I want to look good in my transmog. I don't want to be a goblin.
Bro, goblins look so stupid. I love it. They look dumb as hell, man. And their hats are way bigger too. Like the little shark hat is bigger on goblin than any other race for some reason.
Yeah, actually, hold on. More think about it. Like, if they have transmogs in the game, then shouldn't we just have this too in the game? Because like transmogs are kind of similar, right? Like, why can people just run around? Like, it just feels very not Warcraft like when you just have like people running around in swimsuits and like you're going to battle in swimsuits. Like, oh, that's kind of stupid. But
or you can
it's definitely got more silly lately.
There's those things this expansion that like they're on like a 2-hour cooldown, right? And you can like turn yourself into any race. I think.
Yeah,
Gleeful Glamour.
That fired up would call Panda Hour, and our whole guild would turn into pandas for an hour.
Pandas
and that was
are good.
Like, and like he loved that. So like I feel like
if we have that, then like why not?
Well, that is like kind of letting
I think
you...
that's them trying to answer this.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, but I mean, like, don't make it 1,000 gold each, Ven. How about that?
Yeah.
So, like, I'm not spending a goddamn 1,000 gold every time.
Yeah,
I
true.
Switch off of being
True.
a dwarf. Just
Okay,
make it free.
Yeah, for me as well, the issue is like, man, some dungeons stone form is bis and some meld is bis, and like I hate that decision being a, you know, per character locked behind a kind of inaccessible amount of money to do on a regular basis, right? I mean, I guess not inaccessible, but like, you know, that would be not a fun thing to do. Would be to change to dwarf for every key I want in stone form, and then meld for every other one, right? Like, I don't know. I find that kind of thing being gated behind, like, even with Gleeful Glamour available to make me look like whatever race I want, it's more just like, man, it's not good this way. I don't know, but it's not the end of the world. It's whatever. It does
not
at
affect a
the
very
top of my
small
list.
portion.
Yeah.
We kind of got off a little bit. Does anyone else want to go
Yeah.
on the thing that they think is the biggest problem with the class?
I was gonna go back to that too. I'm gonna agree
What
with
is
you,
yours?
Max. I think the biggest problem is you can't even play the game. I think there are a lot of people who would love to do M+, especially the less represented specs, but it's just impossible. And I think this stems from multiple problems. Like, I don't think there's one specific thing we can pinpoint.
I think it's
But-
content creators making tier lists.
Yeah, I think it's
100%.
Dratnos. Dratnos is probably the
Yeah.
number one on the list.
Yeah.
He's the biggest problem here. He can't even. He's also casting MDI and telling people that you can only play VDH, Asa Rogue, Wrestle Druid, and yeah, like I saw that most recent video. No, but I think the biggest problem is people don't want to play tank and healer. That
Yep.
seems to be like the number one problem, and I just want to go back to that point again. Like, is it really a problem to make tanks and healers powerful? Like, would that be a problem for tanking and healing to be less challenging? Just
Do you think
like,
that's what making people not play tank and healer is purely that they feel bad, they're not powerful enough? I wonder if it's like just that even if they were more powerful, damage is just more fun, and it's more fun than the 3-to-1 ratio that you are.
well,
that
but like,
need
you
for
know,
both,
I don't know. I
right?
feel like it's a lot of fun when you're popping off as a tank or healer too. Like, I'm
Like
looking
they should
back
do more damage.
at-
Then.
I personally think that that's a pretty
do more
small.
of
I think
everything.
it's much more that it's like it's so punishing. If you screw
Yeah.
up and you're a tank, your group's dead.
You also
and
have so much
everybody hates you.
responsibility. Yeah, you
Yeah.
have more responsibility than each individual DPS player as a tank and healer.
But that's what I
certainly.
mean by, like, you know, making it easier or making it stronger. Like,
Yeah.
I'm thinking like Legion level of tanking and healing, or like even like end of BFA, where like every tank and every healer is like, all right, you do one holy shock and it just like full heals someone, or you're just a tank and you're just super tanky. Like, is that a problem? Like, I understand that Blizzard.
I mean, the
doesn't want-
problem you run into is that the best play, and this may not be enough of a problem to not do it, but like the best players literally can't die. You're like solo tanking and like raid, and like you're just like if they're so powerful that a really good player is like an actual god and can never die. Right? That's the problem. But like maybe
But, I
that
mean, is
is
that a problem?
worth it. I don't know. Like
Yeah.
maybe that's worth it to have people who are struggling and feel anxiety joining keys, but they're like, dude, I'm fucking huge. Like, there's no way I'm gonna die to this key. My character's massive. And then more people end up actually tanking. I felt that, dude. I was off stream trying to get 10s done, and the amount of groups you joined that are like 2 DPS and don't have a tank or healer yet, that group will never form. It won't happen. That like, you have to join a group that already has a tank or a healer in it, or you're cooked, which is crazy. Like that is I think you're totally right that it's a huge issue.
Well, yeah, Meg, how do you feel about that? Like, if, say, you know, MISTWEAVER, like all your heals just did like infinite healing, it just did like a ton of healing, you're able to like top people pretty easily. Would that be boring? Would that make it like not challenging, and you would just have fun having like a more challenging healing? Because I know a lot of healers talk about this, especially Automatic Jack and Yumi TV. They prefer when healing's challenging and like, oh, you can't just like instantly heal people up.
I think it more depends on the dungeon pool, on whether or not that's fun or not, and maybe even your spec. Because there was in Dragonflight, MISTWEAVER was kind of like a 1-button, 2-button spec. You just spinning crane kick because you have enough mobs, and then you push Chikukun once every minute. That was not fun. We were super strong. It was probably the best that MISTWEAVER's ever done in keys since I've been playing it, but it wasn't like enjoyable.
Well,
I
is
was
that
kind of
only
just
because
there
of
to
the
push like 2
gameplay?
buttons.
Like, is it because of the class design, or like what if you had to push like multiple buttons, but like if you did the right sequence, you would just do infinite HPS?
If I was rewarded for playing properly, then I would like to be stronger than we are now. Like, I can press Vivify and my cleave will do like 28k. Like, maybe not that low, but it sucks playing correctly and doing the things correctly and the numbers just not being there.
Yeah, I think the reason that maybe her perspective and their perspective may be different is a main solution that all healers always doing crazy healing is that means she can always play monk. And I think for especially like Jack and Yumi TV, they want that hard healing challenge, because if some healer is the only one that can do it, they can have fun because they're just going to play that healer and it doesn't matter to them. Maybe Jack has some leaning towards priest, so they're just like, I don't really care about healer balance as long as there's a healer that can do all these things. I would rather just have a lot of fun and be challenged on that healer, and I could easily see how their perspective would be different, or could be different.
If they do make healers stronger, I do hope that it is more than just one shots. I think Dragonfly was
challenge, right?
Oh boy, yeah. Are you getting us?
I'm asking for impossible things, but
yeah. Oh no, you're just gonna trigger our. They should prune the defensives of this game, because that's why they have to one shot you. It's a domino.
But if healers can top you in one global as well, that also increases the,
correct
percent of your health bar that abilities have to do to threaten you.
Well, but do we need to be like? Does that need to happen?
Well,
to
okay.
Then
we're gonna go up a key level if everything just gets easier. We're just gonna go up a key level, right?
Sure, but I mean, it would still be fun, right? Would it not? I don't know. I'm just like thinking of like Legion.
Well, if you're doing the exact same keys you're doing right now, but the dungeon level says plus 19 next to it instead of plus 17 because they made healers 20% stronger or whatever, and tanks 20% stronger.
Well, I mean, we wouldn't necessarily be able to do a 19 because like it would be very hard to time.
Okay, so you're basically saying like relative to the keeping a key level constant, you would like the DPS check to get harder and the...
Well, I mean, the DPS check, like, let's just say, like, right now, right? Like, right now in World of Warcraft, if we just buffed all healing by, like, 50%, right? Maybe 50% is an extreme number, but let's just say 50%. People still wouldn't be timing 19s right now. Well, except for, like, maybe some of the easier dungeons, you would time a 19. But the point is, like...
Okay.
Whatever we're at right now is probably, like, a fine baseline. It's just, like, make healing... more powerful, or like make tanking and healing more powerful, and I don't see that being necessarily a problem.
I have one kind of cook for like tanking and healing feel, or at least one thing to make healing better would be rewarding players somehow for using defensives properly. And if that happened, that doesn't really exist in the game right now, but like part of an issue with healing a lower key is you just feel like people just don't really care. You're not really going to use why use a defensive? It doesn't do that much damage, or like why kick this thing? And like if kicks, for example, if every time you kicked you got some awesome bonus from it, not some shitty talent you have to take that is like not even that good, like something truly good, right? Then you would like go for kicks more often. That would make things happen less if you...
But you would just try to snipe kicks too, right? Which would cause like kind of degenerate gameplay.
I think I think in the keys that matter, I think people going for kicks too much is a better problem to have than people not using them at all at the moment.
Yeah.
Well, what about for defensives? Like, people intentionally...
defensives is interesting. So it's like there's a certain... They would have to kind of cook this in the game, but like there's just like a certain kind of cast, and you know what that cast looks like. It's because it has a big fucking orange bar or something on default UI, and like you just know what it is, or it makes a sound or something. And if you like, it could be just picture it right now. Anytime a boss is casting an AoE spell that is supposed to like really hurt you, and or like a mini boss, like there's a mini boss like ad that you fight that like does that, and like if you
Bloodguard slams an awkard, right?
Sure, exactly. And if you don't have like a bark skin or something that is like, all of your defenses, some class would be better at this than others, so you couldn't have them happen all the time. But like if you didn't have that up for that, you would get like, I don't know, like I think we suggested like a damage down or something before. And if you don't, like, dude, if DPS players care about their damage, if they got a little bit of a damage down for not having a defensive up for something, you better believe they're going to complain about that for one dungeon, and they're never going to miss that defensive ever again, right? And that would make people care a little bit more about that. The reason I'm saying damage down is like maybe if you had it absorb a certain amount of damage and that gave you some scaling shit, then that's kind of like vengeance. People are just going to stand in shit and then use personals and get the most out of it. So like some kind of binary thing like that, or instead of a damage down, it would just benefit you in some way. I don't really know how that would be, but
We used to have tanks used to have that, right? Active mitigation checks in Legion, where it was like the boss slams you, and if you don't have your active mitigation up, it's much worse for you.
Yeah.
So like something like that, but for DPS with defensives.
I also think, speaking of the kick thing, I thought something that was interesting with that someone mentioned to me is that if you try to kick something and it doesn't work, it gets like half of its cooldown refunded. It can't just not go on cooldown at all, because then you just macro it, and that's super degenerate. But like half of it goes on cooldown. This never, before anyone freaks out and starts commenting, this never works in PvP. You can easily just make this never happen in PvP in the game. They have ways to do that. But in PvE specifically, I do not see a problem at all with trying to kick something, kicking nothing, and then having your kick go on a 6 or 8 second cooldown or something. I think that'd be perfectly fine. It would solve the problem of people all trying to snipe things. But even in the scenario where they don't give you your thing back, I actually think in random pug keys under a 10, having people try to kick too much would be such a wonderful, wonderful change from how it's currently playing out, even at that level. So, yeah. And I think that would make healing a little more approachable. Maybe tanking too. A lot of those things you're kicking are maybe tank damage too, right? So maybe that's a way to do that.
I do want to say I made a post a long time ago about damage downs, and you get like a percent damage down if you stand on a swirly, right? Because they don't know that it's going to kill them in a higher key, but they do know that they'll do less damage. People hated it. They were not happy with that post at all. I got called like so many names, like elitist and everything. I'm like, yeah, it's kind of the point. But
I mean, it is directly. It's not, okay, being elitist is like, well, no one should get hit by anything. That's not what you're saying. I can see how they took that as that. You're basically saying, man, is it annoying to go from healing a high key and then a low key, and low keys are potentially harder to heal because there's so much more extra damage being taken, and it's not super obvious because you don't actually die to the swirly, but you get hit enough, and you're like, oh, it'll just work. But as a healer, that's like super frustrating, and we're talking about solving the problem of people not wanting to heal enough. So incentivizing players to really not get hit by swirlies, even at a lower level, does address that problem. I do think damage downs would be super controversial though, but it is one of those things that I think would go over better than not, because I think people would mess it up a couple times, absolutely hate it, and then what do you keep saying, Dorky? Or is it Growl who always says this? Is they're like, dude, people just care about how much damage they're doing, and like that's everything. I think that's like a little bit of
I think they should minus haste instead of damage. That way they like really
that way you really feel it.
Yeah, that way.
Yeah,
how about your movement speed as well?
That way certain classes don't care and other classes care a lot.
No, they just minus by 50%. Make them make them double globals, and
doesn't have to be that much. It could stack up over time, but even a little bit of damage would make a damage-minded player play a lot more aware. And
I think like some people are just too dumb to even know that there's like a minus damage. Because like I swear
they may not have details, right? Depending on how.
Well, you wouldn't see from details. You'd see from a debuff, and I think if that same debuff with the same icon existed in every dungeon when you got hit by something you clearly should not get hit by and is not super difficult, I think people would get it pretty quick.
No, but I'm trying to remember. Like I remember there was something at some point in M+ that took like heavily reduced damage, and people were still trying to AoE it. I don't know if you guys remember what I'm talking about.
It took heavily reduced damage.
There
something
was
that took reduced damage, and people would still try to hit it.
What expansion?
I don't remember, but
maybe Mist of Tyrna Scythe when the first boss is
no, there's something a little.
There was the affix, the Gahooni's affix, where mobs would just heal everything around them.
So instead of hitting the Gahooni, people would just AoE.
Yeah,
dude, I love that one time on Dorky stream when you filtered your details to not show certain mobs, and then you played with that Red Paladin, and that Red Paladin just like was doing 0 damage on details because he was just AoEing a bunch of spirits instead of hitting the main guy. That was good.
Yeah, there are a lot of levels like that where people just don't know any better.
But like even if it just made DPSing less fun, that would help fix the problem because people would be less attached to DPSing.
That is a way.
You know,
that
if
is
healing
a way
is
to
shitty
solve
and
this problem.
DPSing is, we just make DPSers' lives worse, and that will improve the tank healer ratios.
It will. That's the problem.
We've been looking at it the wrong way. Why make tanking and healing more fun? Let's just make DPS worse.
Yeah, exactly.
Very good. Very good. Okay, Dratnos or Megasett, do any of you guys have something about Mythic Plus that you think is just the biggest problem in the world?
I think mine kind of ties into yours and Dorky's, where the time commitment is just too high for people that don't play this as their job. Like, streaming is my job right now, and I don't even play as much as some people, but it is extremely noticeable when you're trying to get into a group on an off meta spec. Even if like you know people, they're like, yeah, but we really want PI for this. Like it still happens. And then you get through 70% of the key and you wipe and that's it. And you get nothing out of it. And you wasted 30 minutes, whatever, and then you're back into queue. Or you time the key and then you roll like 13 Siege of Paralysis in a row and you're like, I wanted to miss. Like the acquisition system and the time commitment, I think, is turning a lot of people away from playing it more.
Well, that's super interesting because like I know Dorky said earlier, I remember asking him this question. You're doing like a multiple 100-pull raid boss and you're doing 4 hours of raid and you absolutely hate it until it dies, right? And like what makes that different from doing keys? Well, in keys, the fact that things are depleting is part of it is that you're going to a different dungeon because you just depleted that. You got to go do this other thing. And in a way, that's what's different. In a 4-hour raid boss where you're wiping on one boss, you're just doing the same thing every pull. But even if you mess up in Mythic Plus, you're kind of just going somewhere else. And that in a way builds variety because the game is forcing you to move around to different dungeons. But that's also kind of a negative of what you're saying as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd also think it would affect the pug key scene because like if someone's already done with doing a plus 10, you know, what reason would they ever? Well, maybe not 10's the best example. Like if someone's done with like doing a plus 6, what reason would they ever have to go back to a 6?
I mean, that kind of exists now, right? Like, why would someone ever, if people are doing 8s and 10s, why would you ever go to a 6?
Well, if they deplete down to a 6, then, you know, they have to list their 6.
Or you just look for 8s in the group finder, but yeah.
Yeah, you're just like, yeah, my key's dead until...
They look for an 8 until they realize that they can't find a group, and then they're complaining on Reddit about how, I can't join any group, so maybe like,
that's an out-of-touch take.
Your old key.
For me, I've never, even off-stream, like, if my key was like a 3 or a 4 or something, like, there's no world where I would be zoning into that key. Like I'm signing up for a key, and if I don't get accepted to that key, that's fine. But there's no chance I am doing that lower key. Maybe people can't do that. Not everyone can do that.
Yeah, I mean that's just what happens if you like list your own key. Like if you're having to list your own key, you just have to level it and downgrade it.
Well, people listing their own key are also people who feel like they maybe will not get invited because of their class to that 8 or 10, right? Yeah. And like I might as well run my own key because I don't want to wait 40 minutes to get invited.
Yeah.
Dratnos.
Yeah, I'll go a different one because I just don't like answering the same thing as you guys all because I obviously agree with many of the points you guys brought up. I would just take away the damage and health from the plus 12 affix entirely.
Oh,
they nerfed it
already,
but I would just cut that entirely because I just don't think we need like as much of a wall between 11s and 12s as there is with that, and it's much better than it was pre-nerf, but it's still I think something that just the people who aren't going to want to push keys already don't have to go into 12s and 11s. Like they already can just lower their key to a 10 every time, and people are doing that, and that's fine. But for people that would maybe be curious about pushing keys, I don't think we need that extra like friction for getting into those high keys.
Yeah, I think in Dragonflight we had the issue of having like 10 levels of homework keys where nothing really changes between those 10 levels. You don't learn anything. But then right now you have 11 and then you have 12 and there's this massive wall, like you said. So I think that they need to level that out a little bit more without going back to Dragonflight where 90% of them are just key builders.
Mm-hmm. I didn't even understand why this was an issue until I like reacted to a Jack video the other day on stream, and I had a viewer explain to me that there's actually a different set of Mythic Plus players. And I was like, okay, I've always viewed Mythic Plus as, okay, there's like these massive groups of people that are going to do key levels at and then up to like a 10 to get their portals, and then they're done. That is, they're going to get their 10s for their vaults. They got their portals. They're a player that's going to get AOTC, and then they're going to get their 10s. That is, I think, a ton of players. That's like their goal for the season, and they're going to do that. And then there are high key players, people who want to get the title at the end of the season, or maybe just like doing high keys. They find high keys really fun. And I was like, I don't understand why 12s being a wall matters, because if you are someone who's getting your portals, why on earth would you traverse from an 11 to a 12 on accident? That didn't make sense to me. I was like, it seems like there are two different like logical reasons you would do these keys that don't add up. And then I had a viewer explain to me that like there is actually a group of people in between going for title and high keys and just getting your 10s, and it's usually just people having fun playing the game. And they were like, yeah, before they changed the key levels down, and like let's just assume like 10s were 20s then, right? I would do a 20, 21, 22, and it was actually fun. I was having a lot of fun playing the game, and then maybe I would try a 23. But now it's like those people do an 11, and then they zone into a 12, and they're like, no fucking shot. Like, it's so much of a jump that they just stop and they're no longer playing. And anyone that would have fun playing the game and feeling like they can't do that stinks, right? So yeah, I think that's been, they did a great job of like separating what high keys feel like, no push weak. You guys have said that's largely positive, and what low key feels like with the affixes. And 12 is the number where that changes. But what 12 also does is it like increases the scaling like a lot, right? Like it's a bigger jump. Isn't like an 11 to a 12 just like a massive change? What else changes?
Key levels.
Yeah, they cut it from like a 3-level bump to a 2-level bump, right, or something.
Yeah.
With but it's still like
that's still
an
jarring.
Extra. Yeah, I mean that's still a lot. Like there are a lot of people I know that 2-chested an 11 or something, and then they put the 13 key in, and they just like get completely farmed by the first pull, and it's like, I mean that's a lot. Those mobs are doing 33% more damage and healing than they were in the low.
Yeah,
like,
exactly. And
absurd.
why does the key level +3, right? Like if you remember back from Legion, it's like, oh, you did so much damage, you basically already completed the key level above this. So we're going to put you at the key level you're supposed to be based on the run you just did. And this completely fucks all of that. Like you get led into an area you should not be. It's like when you start Elden Ring and you take a right instead of going straight, and you end up in Caelid, and you're like, I'm not supposed to be here. That's how people feel when they end up in a 12, right?
Yeah, I joined one of those groups yesterday where they haven't timed any 12s yet, but we had a bunch of 11s timed. And you can really tell the difference. You can really tell the inexperience. But we ended up timing that key because I was carrying the hell out of it. I was doing like fucking 2 mil overall. The shaman was doing like 1 mil. But
wow.
What I was like saying earlier about the keys feeling too low, these are like probably the same people who are enjoying doing these like +12s or wanting to do something that's like in between weekly vault and title keys. Because it's just more fun to be able to do hard keys where stuff
especially
actually
as
lives. Yeah, especially as a DPS. Like I don't want to be doing it as an 11s as a DPS. Yesterday I was just like farming crest, right? But I'm not gonna go into a +8 to farm crest because like that's just boring. Like I would rather go into an actual +12 key or a 13 key.
All right, well, we have gone through everything. Is it time for the Patreon question?
We've indeed yapped the night away. It is Patreon question time from Jasari that says, I have a cook for M+ that I want to run by y'all. What if all M+ dungeons were shortened to 2-ish bosses and timers of 10 to 15 minutes? Ooh. For me, a dad gamer, proud to get AOTC and Keystone Hero, +10s as a tank feel like a 30-minute long challenging raid encounter. They're super fun but mentally draining, and it sucks to have a key bricked by a mistake or two on the last boss. Even said they were only 10 to 15 minutes, I'd be way more inclined to try pushing higher keys because the time investment for failing or progging is so much less. M+ Forge of Souls would be amazing, am I right? I mean, we did kind of have this with
Megasett mentioned this.
Maw Souls, right?
Oh,
Maw Souls was the closest we've had to this type of
Wait,
dungeon,
wasn't
right?
that was only because you farmed it on a low key level and it was
No,
it was also a
24
minute timer.
Yeah, it was the only dungeon in existence that's lower than 30 minutes.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting. I didn't know that. Wasn't there some 25s? Am I making that up? Okay, I'm making that up. Okay, yeah, well, why not have any more shorter dungeons? I mean, Megasett talked about this, right? How not everyone can... They're just too time consuming. Why not make it shorter?
Take so long. Yeah.
An argument against this is that if a lot of your time is logistics of like finding a group, setting up the group, and starting the key, the shorter the key is, the more... It's like if you were at Disneyland and they made the ride shorter, but you're still standing in line for longer, right? Like we're reducing the ratio of ride to line by making the keys shorter. I still think it could be good though, because like maybe people would just stick in the groups longer, right? Maybe people would do, a couple of keys with that group because they were only 10-minute adventures, right? Or like something like that. So for me, the biggest thing is if we did this for a season, it should be all the keys in the season, because I think it's really bad if there's a season where there's one key that is half as long as
King's
like
Rest.
the longest key.
Agreed.
Like the Legion where we had Archway and Halls of Valor coexisting with Maw of Souls, the amount of Maws that were run versus the Archways was absurd because of the fact that it was like you get the same rewards, but this one is half as long. So I would be down to experiment with this for a season, though. I think that is a cool idea.
Yeah,
I don't even think it
many
needs to
times.
replace keys. Like they could have another form of the game, another
Delves.
dungeon.
Delves are basically
Delves.
that length. They, you
Yeah,
know,
but
just add a mini boss halfway through.
I was thinking more like, I don't
Challenge
want to
mode?
say C mode, yeah, because I never got to do them, but that's kind of the impression that I had of them, is that they were much faster.
Challenge modes are just like really, really easy dungeons you did super fast. I don't really know how to describe it. Like challenge modes would be
M0
like
almost.
Speed running +2s, right?
yeah, it would.
Um,
They were harder than +2s because they limited your gear. It'd be like speed running +8s, +7s, and then doing them in like absolutely ridiculous times would be what C modes were.
Yeah,
That's a
I
cool idea, though.
mentioned this before.
Yeah, I
like,
don't
I
dislike the
do
idea.
like M plus being shorter. I would say the optimal dungeon time would be 20 to 25 minutes at longest. I think that would be nice. And just have like bosses that would live for 3 minutes at most, like 2 minutes for shorter bosses, and then just have like roughly the same trash duration. And I think that'll be like fun to play.
Yeah, I definitely think that we should no 40-minute dungeons. Like, I think that those need to stop.
When
Those
was
they
the
never
moved
come
the
is there a
back.
40-minute
Theater
dungeon
of
this
Pain.
season?
No, not this season.
I don't,
but it's
not this
close.
season. What was the longest? Knockhood was,
Yeah, no good.
Longer.
Yeah, Knockard was 40.
yeah. Yeah, no more of that, please.
All right, W, great question. Good cook.
All right,
That's
great. That's it for
that's
the
it.
main epi. Was that that was a long time, right?
that was a long one. Yeah, that was good. Though. Thanks so much for coming on, Megasett.
Yeah.
Where can people find your like content and stuff?
I am Megasett on all of the platforms. Usually Twitch and YouTube are like the main two.
Hooray! All right.
And we're going to the bonus.
Bye.
We're going to the bonus episode
Oh, yeah,
with
yeah.
Megasett as well, right? For a little bit.
If you can stick around, I know it's
Yeah, just
getting
stay as long
later.
as you want, and then you can leave whenever
Yeah.
you gotta go.
Yeah,
Okay.
leave
All right.
whenever you want.
We'll see you guys there if you're a Poddy patron, and if not, Poddy see you later. Goodbye.
Potty
Poddios.
blow up.
Poddy
Blow
blow
up.
up.